I was bleeding under my dress jacket, surviving on 2 hours of sleep, and trying to celebrate my dad's retirement. But to my sister-in-law, my stumbling meant I was a worthless drunk. She humiliated me in front of everyone. Then, a 3-star general walked in and dropped to his knees. The flight from Ramstein Air Base in Germany to Chicago O'Hare was a blur of turbulence and the lingering metallic smell of copper and antiseptics. My name is Captain Tiffany Anderson. For the past 4 years, I've served as a forward combat medic attached to a classified Special Operations Task Force. Most people in my family thought I sat at a desk in the Pentagon organizing medical supplies. They didn't know about the night raids in Syria, the medevac flights into hot zones, or the fact that less than 72 hours ago, I was knee-deep in rubble, desperately trying to keep a man's chest cavity from collapsing. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of my rental car before turning into the sprawling, tree-lined driveway of my childhood home in Oak Brook, Illinois. I looked terrible. My skin was a pale, exhausted gray, and dark purple bags hung heavy under my eyes. More importantly, underneath the modest, dark blue cocktail dress I had hastily bought at the airport, my lower ribs were tightly wrapped in thick gauze. A piece of shrapnel from an IED blast had caught me during our last extraction. I had sutured it myself 12 messy stitches just so I could get on the transport plane. I promised my dad, Richard, that I would be home for his retirement party. He was stepping down after 35 years as a senior executive at a major logistics firm, and this night was everything to him. I was going to push through the pain, smile, and be the good daughter. I parked behind a line of Mercedes and Lexuses, took a deep, agonizing breath that felt like a hot knife in my ribs, and walked toward the glowing mansion. The moment I stepped through the grand oak doors, the noise hit me like a physical blow. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the booming laughter of corporate executives, and the upbeat jazz quartet playing in the corner immediately sent my nervous system into overdrive. I tightened my grip on my clutch purse, grounding myself. "You're in Illinois. You're safe. There are no threats here," I silently repeated, a mantra my unit's psychologist had taught me. Well, look who finally decided to descend from her high horse. A sharp, perfectly manicured voice cut through the air. I turned to see Harper, my brother David's wife. Harper was a woman who treated life like a competitive sport, where the currency was designer labels and country club memberships. She was draped in a stunning emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown, holding a glass of Moet. Her eyes swept over my off-the-rack dress with immediate, undisguised disdain. "Hello, Harper," I said, my voice hoarse. "You look beautiful. Where's Dad?" "He's mingling with the important guests," she said, emphasizing the word. She took a slow sip of her champagne. "David and I honestly didn't think you'd show." "I mean, playing soldier is so demanding, isn't it? Though looking at you, it seems the military doesn't have much of a dental or beauty plan. You look completely washed out, Tiffany." "It was a long flight," I replied softly, refusing to take the bait. I didn't have the energy for her high school mean girl routine. Not tonight. "Right. A long flight from a desk in Washington," she scoffed. "David told me you're still just doing paperwork. It's a shame. Dad is so proud of David's promotion to VP, and then there's you, still trying to prove some weird feminist point by wearing combat boots." Before I could respond, my brother David walked up, adjusting his silk tie. He gave me a quick, stiff hug. "Tiffany, you made it. Listen, try not to bring up the army stuff tonight, okay? Dad has the CEO and the board of directors here. We want to keep the conversation light and sophisticated. No dreary deployment stories." "I work in logistics, David," I lied smoothly, repeating my cover story. "There are no dreary stories." "Good," Harper interjected, stepping closer so I could smell her overpowering Tom Ford perfume. "Just grab a drink, stand in the corner, and don't embarrass us. This night has to be perfect." They walked away, arm in arm, greeting a pair of wealthy investors with wide, plastic smiles. I leaned against the cool marble of the foyer wall, closing my eyes. A wave of dizziness washed over me, accompanied by a sharp, burning sensation in my side. The stitches were pulling. I needed water, and I needed to sit down, but the party was just beginning. I spotted my dad across the room. Richard Anderson was a good man, but he had always been blind to David and Harper's passive-aggressive cruelty. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. He excused himself from a circle of executives and hurried over, wrapping me in a tight hug. I barely managed to suppress a gasp of pain as he squeezed my injured ribs. "My little girl! You made it!" he beamed, pulling back to look at me. A frown creased his forehead. "You look exhausted, honey. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Dad," I smiled, forcing warmth into my tone. "Just jet lag. Congratulations. 35 years. You earned this." "Thank you, sweetheart. Go get something to eat. The caterers made those bacon-wrapped scallops you love." He patted my shoulder affectionately before being pulled away by another well-wisher. I was entirely alone in a sea of 300 people. The isolation was suffocating. In my world, the world of dust, blood, and the deafening roar of Black Hawk helicopters, I had brothers and sisters who would die for me. Here, in my own home, I was an alien. An embarrassment, a punchline for my sister-in-law's jokes. I navigated toward the bar, my legs feeling heavier with every step. The adrenaline that had kept me upright for the past 3 days was rapidly crashing. By 9 p.m., the party was at its peak. The jazz band was playing louder, the laughter had turned into raucous shouting, and the heat in the room was stifling. I had retreated to a small alcove near the kitchen doors, trying to stay out of the way. My physical condition was rapidly deteriorating. The dull ache in my side had sharpened into a hot, pulsing agony. I reached a hand under my dress to touch my ribs and felt a terrifying, familiar dampness. "I'm bleeding," I realized with a sickening jolt. The stitches tore. I needed to get upstairs to my old bathroom to re-bandage the wound, but to do that, I had to cross the massive ballroom floor, right through the center of the crowd. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Just walk. One foot in front of the other. You've walked miles with a 90-pound ruck. You can cross a damn living room. I stepped out of the alcove. The dizziness hit me instantly. The glittering crystal chandeliers above seemed to sway, their light fracturing into blinding streaks. The chatter of the guests merged into a solid wall of white noise, suddenly sounding terrifyingly like the static of a radio just before a mortar hits. PTSD. Trigger. My mind registered clinically. Breathe. 4, 7, 8. Breathing. I stumbled slightly, my shoulder brushing against a marble pillar. I caught my balance, but a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I took another step, my vision tunneling. Through the haze, I saw Harper and David standing near the center of the room, holding court with a group of Dad's board members. I tried to alter my path to avoid them, but my right leg suddenly gave out. The pain from my torn side radiated down my spine. I pitched forward, throwing my arms out to catch myself. I crashed heavily into a passing waiter. The sound was deafening. A massive silver tray carrying 24 crystal champagne flutes went airborne. Glass shattered across the hardwood floor in a spectacular, glittering explosion. Champagne sprayed everywhere, splashing onto the polished shoes of the executives and the hem of a woman's dress. I hit the floor hard, right on my injured side. A muted, strangled cry escaped my lips as white-hot pain flared through my torso. I curled inward, clutching my ribs, gasping for air that suddenly refused to enter my lungs. The entire room went dead silent. The jazz band stopped mid-note. 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at the woman crumpled on the floor amidst a sea of broken glass. "Oh my God!" a voice shrieked. It was Harper. She pushed her way through the circle of shocked guests, her face twisted in a mixture of fake horror and genuine malice. David was right behind her, looking mortified. I tried to push myself up, my hands slipping on the spilled champagne. I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Dizzy." "Dizzy?" Harper scoffed loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the dead quiet room. She turned to the crowd, playing to her audience. "She's not dizzy. She's completely wasted." "Harper, please," I choked out, finally managing to get onto my knees. I kept my left arm clamped tight against my side, hiding the growing dark stain blooming on my dark blue dress. "Don't Harper me!" she yelled, stepping closer, careful to keep her designer shoes away from the glass. She looked at David, then at my father, who was frozen in shock at the edge of the crowd. "Richard, I told you this would happen. She can't even stay sober for one night to celebrate your career." "Tiffany, are you drunk?" David hissed, grabbing my upper arm and yanking me roughly to my feet. The sudden movement ripped another stitch. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood to keep from screaming. "David, stop, please. I'm sick. I'm hurt." "You're a disgrace!" Harper's voice echoed off the high ceilings. She snatched a microphone from the nearby podium, supposedly set up for speeches later, and turned it on. The feedback whined sharply. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this pathetic interruption," Harper announced to the wealthy crowd, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "This is my sister-in-law, Tiffany. While David and Richard have been building respectable lives, Tiffany has been floating around in some low-level government desk job, clearly developing a massive substance abuse problem. She shows up to her own father's elegant retirement party smelling like sweat, dressed like a vagrant, and completely intoxicated." Whispers broke out among the crowd. Disgusted looks were shot in my direction. I saw a board member shake his head, muttering to his wife, "Dad!" I looked through the crowd at my father. He looked heartbroken, humiliated. He took a step forward, but David held up a hand to stop him. "I'll handle her, Dad," David said, his voice cold. He leaned into my ear. "You are going to walk out the back door, get in your car, and leave. Now. You've ruined everything." "I haven't had a single drop of alcohol," I pleaded, my voice trembling from the physical shock setting in. My vision was graying at the edges. "David, look at me. I need a hospital." "Oh, now she wants attention," Harper mocked into the microphone. "She wants to play the victim. You are a pathetic, attention-seeking drunk, Tiffany. You're nothing but a failure, a stain on this family's name. You have never achieved anything. You have never mattered, and you are entirely worthless." The cruelty in her words was a physical weight. I stood there, swaying, bleeding out in front of my family, surrounded by people who viewed me as garbage. I had held the hands of dying heroes. I had earned the Silver Star. But in this room, under the harsh glare of the chandeliers and Harper's relentless mocking, I was nothing. I closed my eyes, preparing to just turn and limp out into the night. I was going to let her win. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. But before I could take a single step, the heavy oak doors at the front of the ballroom slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. The whispers instantly died. Even Harper lowered the microphone, startled. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed military police officers, was a man in full Class A Army dress blues. 3 silver stars gleamed on each of his shoulders. His chest was a massive, intimidating wall of colorful ribbons, medals, and a combat infantryman badge. It was Lieutenant General Thomas Arrington, the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, and he was looking directly at me. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The only sound was the sharp, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of Lieutenant General Thomas Arrington's polished Oxford shoes against the hardwood floor. As he marched past the shattered crystal and the puddles of spilled champagne, the sea of wealthy executives, socialites, and board members parted instinctively, pulling back as if a physical force field surrounded him. Harper, desperately clinging to the microphone and her vanishing sense of control, adjusted her posture. Her eyes darted from the general's imposing figure to the 2 heavily armed military police officers flanking the entrance. In her shallow, status-obsessed mind, she immediately calculated that this high-ranking military official must be here for my father, Richard, or perhaps as a surprise guest arranged by her husband's corporate board. Smoothing down the front of her emerald gown, Harper stepped forward, plastering on her most winning plastic smile. "General, what a profound honor," she projected into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am Harper Anderson. Welcome to Oak Brook. Please forgive this dreadful scene. We were just in the process of having security remove my sister-in-law. She has a terrible drinking problem, and unfortunately, she chose tonight to make a public spectacle." General Arrington didn't even look at her. He didn't break his stride, nor did he acknowledge her extended hand. He walked right past Harper as if she were a ghost, his steely, weathered eyes locked entirely on me. I was still on my knees, swaying, my left arm pressed so tightly against my ribs that my fingers were going numb. The edges of my vision were pulsing with black spots. I looked up at the 3-star general, a man who commanded the most elite and lethal fighting forces on the planet, and felt a wave of profound confusion. "General, sir," I rasped, trying weakly to push myself up to a position of attention. "Old habits die hard, even when you are bleeding out. I'm not in uniform, sir, please excuse." "Stand down, Captain." Arrington's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that commanded the entire room without the need for a microphone. He stopped directly in front of me. This hardened warrior, a veteran of countless foreign conflicts, a man who regularly briefed the President of the United States, looked down at my trembling, pathetic form. And then, to the absolute shock of everyone in the room, General Thomas Arrington lowered himself. His dress trousers brushed the floor as he dropped heavily to his knees, right in the spilled champagne and broken glass. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. My father, Richard, took a stunned step forward, his hands trembling. David's jaw literally dropped. "Sir, you're ruining your uniform," I whispered, my mind struggling to process reality. General Arrington reached out, his large, calloused hands gently taking my shoulders. I saw something in his eyes that I had never expected to see in a commanding officer of his magnitude. The rims of his eyes were bright red, swimming with unshed tears. "To hell with the uniform, Tiffany," he said, his voice breaking, completely ignoring military protocol. I was in the air when the debrief from the Syria extraction crossed my desk. "I diverted my flight. I tracked you here because I couldn't wait. I had to look you in the eyes." "Sir?" I breathed, coughing weakly. The metallic taste of blood was strong in the back of my throat now. Arrington looked up, his gaze sweeping over the horrified crowd, lingering intensely on Harper, who was now standing frozen, the microphone hanging loosely at her side. When the general spoke again, his voice was a booming baritone, echoing off the chandeliers, carrying the weight of absolute authority and righteous fury. "This woman," Arrington declared, pointing a firm finger at me, "is Captain Tiffany Anderson. She is a forward combat medic attached to the Joint Special Operations Command. And 72 hours ago, in a classified zone that none of you will ever read about in the news, her convoy was hit by a coordinated ambush. A massive improvised explosive device disabled the lead striker vehicle. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The corporate executives, the board members, my father, they were all hanging on his every word. That vehicle caught fire," Arrington continued, his voice trembling with raw, unfiltered emotion. "Inside that vehicle were 6 operators, trapped, unconscious, and burning. The incoming enemy fire was so heavy that the quick reaction force couldn't reach them. But Captain Anderson didn't wait for backup." Arrington looked back down at me, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his weathered cheek. Without orders, without cover, and armed only with her sidearm and her medical kit, she ran 60 yards through an open kill zone. She dragged all 6 men out of that burning wreckage. During the extraction of the final man, an RPG detonated nearby. Captain Anderson took a blast of shrapnel to her torso. She was severely wounded, but she refused medical evacuation. My father let out a choked, devastated sob, finally pushing past David to get closer, though the MP guards at the door took a subtle step forward to maintain the perimeter. "She refused evacuation," Arrington repeated, his voice rising in volume and intensity, because the man she had just pulled from the fire had a severed femoral artery. She stayed in the dirt, bleeding from her own horrific wounds, taking enemy fire, and held the artery of that soldier closed with her bare hands for 45 minutes, until the medevac choppers finally arrived. She saved his life, and the lives of 5 others. Arrington leaned in closer to me, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that nonetheless carried through the silent room. "That final operator, the one whose artery you clamped, was First Lieutenant Bradley Arrington." "My son," the general bowed his head, his forehead resting gently against my uninjured shoulder. "You gave me my boy back, Tiffany. You gave me my son back. I owe you my life." The United States Army owes you a debt that can never be repaid." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, crushing weight that completely obliterated the petty, pristine world my sister-in-law had built. The jazz band was forgotten. The champagne was forgotten. "General," I whispered, my strength finally giving out. The adrenaline had completely evaporated. I just did my job." "You went above and beyond the call of duty, Captain," Arrington said, lifting his head. "The President has fast-tracked your paperwork. As of this morning, you have been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, and—" He paused, his eyes narrowing as he finally noticed the way I was holding my side. He looked down at my hand. Underneath the harsh, bright lights of the ballroom, the dark blue fabric of my dress could no longer hide the truth. A massive, horrifyingly dark stain had spread across my entire left side, pooling heavily at my waist and dripping slowly onto the polished floor. "My God," Arrington breathed. "You're bleeding out." "Medic!" General Arrington roared, a sound so explosive and terrifying that several guests physically jumped backward. The two military police officers at the doors immediately sprang into action, sprinting across the ballroom floor. Behind them, bursting through the oak doors, came two combat medics carrying heavy trauma bags. Chaos erupted. My father screamed, dropping to his knees beside me, his hands hovering over my bloody dress, terrified to touch me. "Tiffany!" "Oh my God, Tiffany, my baby, what did they do to you?" "I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Dad." "It's okay," I tried to say, but my vision was fading into a swirling tunnel of white. I felt the strong, capable hands of the military medics catch me as I finally collapsed backward. "Let's get her flat. Elevate her legs." "We need a pressure dressing on that flank, now," one of the medics shouted, ripping open his trauma bag. I felt the cold snip of trauma shears cutting away the expensive fabric of my dress, exposing the thick, blood-soaked gauze underneath. As the medics worked frantically to stabilize me, General Arrington stood up. He drew himself up to his full, imposing height. The sorrow in his eyes had vanished, replaced by the terrifying, cold fury of a commanding officer who had just witnessed one of his heroes being mistreated. He slowly turned his gaze to Harper and David. Harper was hyperventilating, her face devoid of all color. She looked like she was going to be sick. David was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror, shame, and the sudden realization that his career was disintegrating before his eyes. "Drunk." Arrington spat the word out as if it were poison. He took a slow step toward Harper. "You accuse this woman, who has spilled more blood for this country than you have ever conceptualized in your shallow, pathetic life, of being a worthless drunk." "General?" We didn't know," David stammered, stepping in front of his wife. "She never talks about her deployments. We thought she was just a paper pusher." She crashed into the waiter. She looked intoxicated. "She was collapsing from blood loss because her stitches tore, you imbecile," Arrington thundered. He pointed at the bloody floor. "Look at it. Look at what she endured to come to this ridiculous party to honor her family, while you stood there and publicly humiliated her over spilled champagne." "General Arrington, please," a stern, authoritative voice called out from the crowd. Harrison Caldwell, the CEO of the logistics firm and David's ultimate boss, stepped forward. His face was a mask of absolute disgust. He looked at David, then at Harper, and finally down at me, shaking his head. "General, on behalf of this entire company, I apologize," Harrison said firmly. He turned a lethal glare onto my brother. "David, I have spent the last 3 hours listening to your wife boast about your promotion to vice president next week. Let me be perfectly clear. That promotion is permanently rescinded. In fact, you can clear out your desk on Monday. I will not have a man in my executive suite who treats his own flesh and blood an American hero like garbage for the sake of appearances." "Mr. Caldwell, please," David begged, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "I've given 10 years to this company, and your sister gave her life to this country." Harrison snapped back. "You are done, David. And Harper, I suggest you both leave before the police are called to escort you off the premises." The social execution was instantaneous and absolute. The murmurs of the crowd turned into openly hostile glares. The wealthy socialites who had been sipping champagne with Harper 10 minutes ago now looked at her as if she were carrying the plague. "Get away from us, my father," Richard growled, standing up to face his son. Tears were streaming down his face. "David, you slandered your sister in my house. You let that vicious woman mock my daughter while she was bleeding to death. Get out of my house. I don't want to see either of you ever again." "Dad," David whispered, totally broken. Harper, bursting into dramatic, humiliated tears, grabbed her skirt and ran toward the front doors, fleeing the judgment of her peers. David stood there for a second longer, utterly defeated, before turning and following his wife out into the night. Their perfect, pristine world had completely collapsed. "BP is dropping! We need to move her, General!" the lead medic yelled, breaking the tension. "We've got a medevac chopper inbound, touching down on the golf course behind the estate in 2 mics. "Move out," Arrington ordered. I felt myself being lifted onto a canvas stretcher. The pain was excruciating, but strangely, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a punchline. As the medics carried me out through the grand double doors, the impossible happened. 300 wealthy executives, board members, and socialites, the same people who had sneered at me moments before, fell completely silent. Slowly, starting with Harrison Caldwell, they began to clap. The applause rippled outward, growing louder and louder, until it was a deafening roar of respect and gratitude. My father walked beside my stretcher, holding my hand tightly, weeping unashamedly. General Arrington walked on my other side, a silent, immovable guardian. I woke up 3 days later in a private VIP recovery suite at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing I heard, a comforting, familiar sound. The room was filled with flowers, but the only person in the room was my father. He was sleeping in a chair beside my bed, looking 10 years older. When I squeezed his hand, he woke up with a start, immediately bursting into fresh tears, kissing my forehead repeatedly. He told me everything that had happened after I blacked out. David had been officially fired. Harper had become a total pariah in their country club circles. Forced to delete all her social media after the story of her cruelty leaked among the executives, their flawless facade was shattered forever. A week later, sitting up in my hospital bed in my Class A uniform, I received a visit from the top brass. Lieutenant General Arrington stood proudly at the foot of my bed, accompanied by a young man leaning heavily on a cane. It was First Lieutenant Bradley Arrington. He was pale and recovering from massive reconstructive surgery, but he was alive. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and simply mouthed, "Thank you." The general stepped forward and pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to my chest. I wasn't a paper pusher. I wasn't a disgrace. I was Captain Tiffany Anderson of the United States Army, and for the first time in my life, the people who mattered finally knew exactly what that meant. Wow, what an absolutely incredible ending. Tiffany finally got the hero's recognition she deserved, and Harper and David learned the hard way that true class is about character, not designer clothes. Family dynamics can be so toxic, but justice was served perfectly. If you loved this story of resilience and karma, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic real-life stories. See you next time!